Oh, that's right. How you doing this afternoon? Hey, it's me, Ann Eller, right here with Penny. She's snoozing now, so we're all good here today. And we've got Dr. Paul Kim with us. He practices cardiology at Advanced Cardiology Associates, a physician practice of South Regional Healthcare. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to my cardiologist, Jeff's cardiologist, and hundreds of other people's cardiologists this afternoon. So how are you doing today, Dr. Kim?
I'm well. Thank you, Ann. And thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you on WCRS.
Absolutely. This is great. So let's see. Do you have a dog?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. His name is Cosmo. He's a Shih Tzu.
A Shih Tzu. Okay. Well, Penny, you knew Penny's name, so she was real impressed on that. So, how long have you been with Self? Or how long have you been a doctor?
Right. I graduated from Baylor College of Medicine back in 1994, and did my residency for about 3 years at Baylor College of Medicine, and then trained at the Texas Heart Institute after that. And I was recruited fresh out of training to come to South Regional in 2002. And that's when I had the opportunity to start the interventional cardiology program here. So before 2002, we did not have the capability to do angioplasty, or the ballooning procedure, as they say. And since then, we've had that capability here. And I've been here for about 24 years.
Time flies, doesn't it?
Time flies.
That's great. So, so was part of the reason that you came here of being able to do angioplasty, or?
Right. The interesting thing is that angioplasty started in Atlanta in the early 1990s. And what struck me was that angioplasty kind of took over the world in about 5 to 6 years. But just 3 hours away from Atlanta, there was still a hospital in this country that did not have that capability. So I thought it was interesting that this was a technology that was available everywhere around the world except 3 hours away from Atlanta. So it was tantalizing to me to be able to bring that technology here.
That's terrific. So we're going to be talking about, with Dr. Kim, of course, we're going to be talking about some of the issues. How do you know you have having a heart attack? What things to look for? How to take care of yourself? But one of the things that he really wanted to come on and talk about today was how quickly medicines and the new medicines that are out there that you say are game changers.
Right. What's interesting about this year is that there have been about 3 or 4 new drugs that have been approved by the FDA that are hitting the market as we speak. There are 2 of them that are cholesterol-related medicines that I thought I'd bring up. One is called Lipvendra, which is also known as enlicitide. This is an interesting pill that you can take that's about 20 milligrams once daily that will cut your bad cholesterol, your LDL, in half. And there were injectables called Repatha and Leqvio that did the same thing, but they required either a shot twice a month or a shot twice a year to be able to achieve that end. And of course, the advantage of these drugs, which are known as PCSK9 inhibitors, was they weren't statins. And of course, statins sometimes, for some people, approximately 10 to 15% of people can't take statins because of muscle aching or other side effects like liver enzyme abnormalities and so forth. So for these people, and for people who are already on a statin but are not getting to their LDL goal, getting their bad cholesterol to where it needs to be, these medicines are used as an adjunct to help people get to the recommended goals as far as getting your cholesterol down. So the interesting thing about Lipvendra is that it's a pill taken once a day that will be effective enough to cut your bad cholesterol, your LDL, up to 60%. So if you were walking around with an LDL level of 160 or 150, it could possibly get it down to 70 or 80, which maybe 20 years ago was unheard of.
Wow.
There's another drug that's out there called Tryngolza, also known as olezarsen. This is a great drug for people who have high triglyceride levels. And there are a number of people who have triglyceride levels in excess of 500, maybe even up to 1,000. And there were older drugs that were out there that would bring these levels down modestly, like drugs called Lopid, also known as fenofibrate, and drugs of that sort. You might be able to get these levels down by 10 or 20%. This will cut your triglyceride level down by 60 to 70%. And this is also a once-a-day pill that comes in 2 doses, either 50 milligrams or 80 milligrams. And it's a game changer because people with high triglyceride levels, especially with levels as high as 1,000, are at risk of developing what's called pancreatitis, an inflammation of the pancreas, which can be not just painful but also life-threatening. And this is a great drug that will bring people out of that danger zone and bring their triglyceride levels to something that's a lot safer.
Now, you talk about all these great new drugs, but what about the side effects? Those are the things that I watch on TV. And, sometimes I'll say to myself, I'll keep the ailment rather than take the drug, right?
True.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about these medicines is that they're not related to statins and do not come with the same sort of muscle aching that the statins have been implicated in. And then there are some maybe unfounded reports of dementia and things like that, especially with a drug called simvastatin. These drugs do not have those side effects. The only side effects that we are aware of is that you do have to monitor liver tests, liver enzymes, and have those levels checked from time to time. But as far as muscle aching and the like, there's none of that.
No, I was going to say, were these drugs actually for something else, or had they been developed for what they're being used for? And you saying they had just really been approved by the FDA? So
right, these are sort of drugs that are developed specifically for these problems. What's interesting is that understanding the biology of a lot of these disease processes has come a long way in the last 20 years. So we understand what proteins or what particles in our bloodstream are responsible for some of these diseases. And these drugs are sort of like lasers against these particles. And so they're very specific about how they act. And for that reason also, it can also limit the number of side effects because they're only geared to attack or interact with a certain protein or particle and try to avoid interacting with other things. One thing we don't know is, of course, interactions with other medicines. So only time will tell whether or not some of these medicines may have some interactions with other drugs, especially like antibiotics and some things like that.
Now, what about as far as for people on Medicare, for seniors and everything? Are these drugs being covered by that, or?
That's interesting. Usually with a new drug, these medicines on average are very expensive. One interesting thing that some of these drug companies are doing nowadays is that they are introducing these newer medicines at a much lower drug cost or price point. So even though they may be still expensive, as most new drugs are, these drugs are a lot less expensive than they used to be. New drug used to be about $600 a month, give or take, $100 or $200 depending on your coverage, but the cash price was usually around $600. These drugs are now being offered for around $300, which still comes out to like $10 a pill per day. But I think a lot of drug companies have heard the public about how upset they are that so many new drugs are out of reach, and hopefully I think they're trying to come around and be able to offer medicines at a much lower price point.
Well, see, my suspicious mind would say, are they going to give it an intro price and then get you hooked on it and then want to go up on the price?
Time will tell.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, with President Trump and what they've been doing with drug prices, Medicare has been covering a lot more drug prices too.
True. And of course, I think that there's been an argument to allow Medicare or CMS to be able to negotiate drug prices, which is something that they really weren't able to do, even though they are a large purchaser of drugs and should be able to have negotiating capability.
That's right. So, one of the things I think that's on everybody's mind is with Lindsey Graham's death, what he died of and what maybe could have been done, couldn't have been done. I know we don't have the whole medical record here, but what can you tell us about that?
So what I understand is that Lindsey Graham died of an aortic dissection. We don't know whether this was a thoracic aortic dissection or whether this was an abdominal aortic dissection. But one thing we do know about aortic dissections is this is a unique disease in which what happens is the lining of the blood vessel, the aorta, develops a tear. The aorta has basically three layers. There's an inner layer, a middle layer, and an outer layer. The inner layer is like a carpet over a subfloor. And because of some defect, whether it be ongoing high blood pressure, maybe undertreated or underrecognized high blood pressure, or an underlying disease like Marfan syndrome or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, these are conditions where the tissue themselves have some sort of defect. I don't think Senator Graham had any of these predisposing factors. Maybe high blood pressure for all we know, but nothing exotic like Marfan's. But a tear occurs in that inner lining called the intima. And just like if you take a carpet and tear it and lift up the flap of carpet, if you allow blood to rush underneath that flap, you can raise the carpet up to the rest of the ceiling. And if enough blood rushes in under the carpet, then you can occlude the flow of blood downstream. And that's what kills people. Also, what can happen is that these aneurysms can rupture. So just like a balloon popping, the aorta can literally explode, as they say, or develop a hole, and people can bleed out into their body and succumb to that. Of course, we don't know exactly what happened here, but these aneurysms, these dissections, can kill people instantly.
Is that why they call it the Widowmaker, right?
Not necessarily. The Widowmaker is exclusively for a blockage in this particular coronary artery.
Oh, okay.
So this is more of a tear in the big blood vessel that comes out of the heart. And it's not as rare as we think. About 10% of sudden cardiac death can be attributable to aneurysm dissection or rupture. There are a number of different celebrities in the past who have had aortic dissections, namely Lucille Ball had an aortic dissection. George C. Scott died of an aortic dissection. Scott Ritter, the actor from Three's Company, he died from an aortic dissection. There was also an actor, Alan Thicke, I think, from that show. I forgot what show he was on.
I don't remember either.
Yeah, but he had an aortic dissection as well. So this is not a rare entity, but it is a fairly uncommon entity. But it is something that I think should raise public awareness that this is an issue.
Well, how do you know how do you know that you might? How would one know that one might have that, or are there any kind of symptoms or anything?
Absolutely. For symptoms, it may be chest pain. It may be one unique feature about aortic dissection is that it's a chest pain that oftentimes is described as a ripping sensation that radiates to the back. If an ER physician hears that, immediately the bells go off in our mind that this is a possibility. A pulsatile mass in your belly may be a sign that you have an aneurysm. One time I felt the belly of a patient and felt their belly literally beating against my hand, and we checked an ultrasound, and he had a huge abdominal aortic aneurysm. So there are ways to detect aneurysms.
Can you save a person?
Yes. If caught in time, many aneurysms can be treatable. A lot of aneurysms, especially thoracic aortic aneurysms, can be their lives can be saved by a surgical procedure in which the aorta is replaced with a Dacron graft. Some dissections from high blood pressure that occur downstream can be managed with medicines, particularly with blood pressure medicines, to bring their blood pressure to normal or even low number levels to allow the body to heal from this. So there is a way to survive a dissection if you're caught early enough and treated appropriately.
Right. The only thing that I know about Lindsey Graham is that they had said that he wanted to go on that Meet the Press show the next day, and so he said after he'd been on the show he would do this. Well, he never made it to the show. So that brings up an interesting, how do you know when you've got a problem and you better get yourself to the hospital or be looked at?
Right. I think in my profession, of course, the biggest thing is heart attacks and aortic dissections and blood clots to the lungs. Any of these three can present with chest pain, but there are a lot of things that can cause chest pain, things like indigestion, pneumonia, even a pulled muscle can mimic a heart attack in many ways. So a lot of this depends on how the symptoms arise. Obviously, if it happens after a meal, that may suggest that heartburn might be your answer.
Right.
If it happens after exercise, if it happens at rest and wakes you up, and you haven't eaten anything before, that may also influence our decision-making process. The quickest thing that we do, of course, is get an EKG and chest x-ray as soon as you come to the emergency room or seek medical attention. And from there, of course, a physical examination and some blood tests. And there are blood tests that we check to see if there is evidence of heart muscle damage. EKGs can show us whether or not there's a heart attack. And of course, chest x-rays or other imaging like CAT scans can help us determine whether there's a blood clot in the lungs or an aortic dissection or aneurysm.
So, is crushing chest pain really the most common symptom? And what are the most commonly overlooked symptoms that people...
Shortness of breath and chest pain are a big red flag. Mm-hmm. Feeling like you're going to pass out, breaking out in the sweating bullets, as they say. Yes. And of course, there's always the picture of the person who's holding a fist over their chest. And that is a classic symptom. Of course, not everybody presents like that. And of course, women, interestingly enough, may not necessarily present with the classic symptoms. They may come in.
Why is that?
We don't know.
Really? Okay.
But women do feel angina, as they say, which is basically a fancy word for chest pain, in different ways. So it may not be classically right over the chest. It may be neck pain. It might be shoulder pain or left or right arm pain.
Well, how are you supposed to know then?
Right. I think a lot of it is listening to your inner voice and knowing that this is a sensation that you've not felt before and are not familiar with, and there was no reason for it. In other words, you didn't pull a muscle. You didn't just have a big Mexican meal and so forth and have too much to eat. So I think it's important to listen to your inner voice, and if your body is telling you that you might be in trouble, to listen to that. And obviously, if you're short of breath, breaking out in sweat and so forth, or feeling like you're going to pass out, those are definitely red flags that you have to listen to.
Well, I wanted to share a story with our listeners about my husband, Jeff, and he all day long he hadn't felt well, but he kept telling me he was okay, and finally it was 12 o'clock at night, and he was insistent upon going to the hospital, and you happened to be on call that night, and everybody said they didn't think he was having a heart attack, but Jeff was convinced that he was. And I will never forget the time that you were standing there looking at Jeff and talking to him, and he goes, well, we could do this test, we could do that test. And then you just stood there for a minute and you were very quiet. And you looked at Jeff and you go, Jeff, do you have a sense of impending doom? And Jeff sat straight up in the bed and said yes. And that changed everything that you were thinking. Explain that to us.
I think part of the art of medicine is to be able to listen to the patient and understand what the patient is trying to convey to you. And coming from a position of empathy and compassion, and of course, there's a scientific mind and an approach to this as well, and being able to combine the two and take what the patient is telling you objectively, but also listening to what the patient himself or herself is listening to from their own inner voice. And that's a very important voice to have to listen to. And so I think if Jeff really in his heart of hearts felt like something was really wrong, we have to take that into account and take that seriously.
The next day you did find out he needed triple bypass, so it was a good call on your part. Yes. So, but what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I think that's important that we pay attention to what people say.
Yes. So many times though in today's world, I think we're all in such a hurry, and we think that a pill is going to cure this or a pill is going to cure that, and we don't really listen to our bodies, do we? And sometimes doctors, because they're so busy, don't have the opportunity, I think, or don't take the opportunity.
Absolutely. And sometimes we get a little bit dependent on just checking blood tests and imaging and letting all of that do the talking, when really, if you, as they say, if you just listen to the patient long and hard enough, the patient will tell you what's wrong with them. So that has to be something that has to be relearned and reinforced from time to time.
Now, what about AI? I mean, since everybody's talking about AI, they are talking about, in medicine particularly, how AI can read x-rays better than humans and this type of thing. Are you using AI for any aspects of your tests or whatnot?
We don't really use AI for testing, but I know that AI is out there, and I think the database in terms of radiologic studies like x-rays and CAT scans, I believe that AI has some superiority because AI has access to a database that is going to be beyond what any one human can remember.
Right.
At the same time, I think there are limitations to what AI can do from a personal standpoint, because every patient is different, and even though the tests may point to one thing, you still have to take the subjective part into account and make sure that the story matches what you get with the numbers and the images. AI may be able to catch up, but not right now. We do use AI in the office to help us generate notes. Oftentimes, right now we use a system that's related to Microsoft Copilot, where it can listen to the conversation that you're having with your patient and be able to generate a dialogue to express into the medical record what you just spoke of. And so it kind of is a virtual scribe that records the visit. And I think that helps because that takes some of the busy work out of the doctor's lives as far as dictating. We don't have to repeat things. And oftentimes what we repeat may not be accurate when we relay it again.
Sure.
Just like that game telephone. You know, if they say it to me and then I have to say it back, I may put a different inflection and make it sound like that's not really what was said.
Right.
So I think AI has been helpful in keeping things somewhat subjective in that sense.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Well, what else would you like to talk about here today?
I'd like to talk about coronary artery disease, the risk factors for coronary artery disease. There are basically 6 of them.
Okay.
There are modifiable risk factors and non-modifiable risk factors. Obviously, non-modifiable risk factors are age. As people get older, the risk of having coronary artery disease goes up. In men, it's 45 and up, and in women, it's generally 55 and up, although that number seems to change by the year as we see younger and younger people come in with heart attacks and strokes. But age is something you can't modify. You can't help but collect birthdays. Family history, how you pick your parents, is also another non-modifiable aspect. And of course, if you have a family history of heart attacks or strokes, there is definitely a connection there, because if your mother or father or even a paternal or maternal second degree relative like an aunt or uncle, if they've had heart attacks or strokes, that may also play into your fate as well. Modifiable risk factors include things like high blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol levels, and physical activity. Some people will say obesity, but I've seen plenty of obese people with absolutely clean coronary arteries, and I've seen plenty of very thin people with extensive coronary artery disease. So I don't necessarily feel that obesity by itself is a risk factor, but I think...
So what causes that?
I think physical activity. Sometimes I think people are genetically prone to be heavy.
Right.
And there are people who are genetically prone to be thin. And that in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean that you're healthy. Simply because you're thin doesn't mean you're healthy. And simply because you're overweight doesn't necessarily mean that you're unhealthy, at least from a cardiovascular standpoint. So it's important to maintain good blood pressure. It's important if you're diabetic to keep your A1C under control. And of course, if you the other risk factor, most important, and I've neglected to mention that, is smoking. If you smoke, of course, it's really important that you quit. And if there's any one risk factor that I think is the worst of all of them is tobacco dependency.
Now, okay, so smoking. Now, what about all these vapes that are out there now?
We don't know. I think vaping is safer than smoking from a heart attack standpoint. Also, from a pulmonary standpoint, I think cigarette smoke is worse in terms of the development of COPD and emphysema. But vaping really hasn't been around that long. And so we don't know the long-term side effects of whether or not these oils that the nicotine is dissolved in over time may be carcinogenic or have any adverse effect on your coronary vasculature. And I think time will tell. One interesting thing is we do know that chewing tobacco is a little bit safer than smoking in the sense that we don't see as much coronary artery disease and certainly not as much COPD or emphysema, but there is an uptick in oral cancers and the like.
Bottom line, just don't do it.
Right. I think tobacco and tobacco-derived products are probably the worst thing that you can put in your body.
Well, so that's a risk, and that is a risk factor that one can control.
Correct.
Even if you don't want to control it, you can control it, right?
It's the hardest habit, I think, to break. I think if everyone out there quit smoking, my business would go down tremendously. So I'm not advocating smoking, but I know that smoking definitely keeps you with job security, as they say.
Now, what about smoking marijuana? There's a lot of people out there smoking marijuana.
I think in modest amounts, smoking marijuana doesn't have that big of an impact on coronary artery disease, but there are people who smoke a lot of weed. And
right.
I think if you smoke a lot of weed, it's probably not good for you.
Okay, well, we're getting all kinds of questions coming in here. You have hyped a lot of interest here this afternoon. That's great. We're going to answer some questions here in just a minute, but I think we'll just kind of work ahead a little bit. Now, I was reading an article the other day about walking, and they said they could actually tell how healthy you were by how fast or how slow you walked. What about something like that?
I think if you're capable of walking, like if you don't have an orthopedic reason why you can't walk briskly, a brisk walk is very beneficial, and also changing the speed and intensity with which you walk is important. It's not just that you go out and walk your dog at a single pace, but if you can vary it, of course, if you're going up and down a hilly terrain, that helps. Or if you decide to walk a little bit faster for a certain period of time and then take it easy, that I think mimics what we were like when we were more dependent on our legs for transportation rather than cars. So going back 150 years, how people got around, that's probably a more healthy way of how getting around than, of course, jumping on a bike, scooter, or car and going to the store down the road.
Yeah, I've got an electric bicycle. I guess I'm not really doing myself any good, am I?
No, you're getting out there and you're enjoying the great outdoors. You're fine, Ann.
Yeah, well, anyways, and you said what having a dog isn't great because it gets you outside, right?
Right. I think having a dog is a very good thing for people to have the obligation to take the dog out and walk the dog. And I think for me, walking my dog has probably been one of the best things that happened to me as far as making sure that I got my steps in daily. It's not just enough to just walk around the hospital and round on people. That doesn't count. And the people who tell me that they walk enough at work, unless you're walking a long distance at work, maybe in some sort of construction where you're having to cover a lot of ground, it's still not the same as a dedicated walk.
Yeah, stopping, sitting down, getting up, going here doesn't really count. Okay. Well, what developments in heart care are you well, first off, let me give this telephone number. If you got a question or a comment, 864-332-9355. We are here with Dr. Kim. Dr. Kim, he is in the heart business, and he's an excellent one. He's my heart doctor and many others. And so I just want you to know that if you've got a question, now is your opportunity. 864-332-9355. Please go ahead and send us those calls, and we'll answer them in just a few minutes. But I wanted to ask you, Dr. Kim, what developments in heart care are you most excited about going forth?
I think that the next frontier in cardiovascular care from a physician standpoint and from a technological standpoint, I think is the ability to replace valves without having to do open heart surgery. I think the technology as far as balloon angioplasty and stenting has come to a plateau where we've done everything we can with balloons and stents. And of course, there has been some incremental improvement in bypass surgery, but I really think that the next quantum leap in care is the ability to replace all four, or basically the three most important cardiac valves without having to do open heart surgery.
And you think can you go in through a wrist, or
go in through your
groin?
groin and the artery in your groin, or even the artery in your neck, and be able to replace your aortic valve, your mitral valve, or your tricuspid valve. There are also some unique cases where the pulmonic valve, which is the valve between your heart and your lungs, can be replaced if necessary as well. So basically, all four cardiac valves may be able to be fixed or replaced without having to do open heart surgery.
Now, what do they use for these valves?
They use pig valves.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Yes.
So, but these are not pig valves in the sense that they are valves cut out of pigs from their valves. This is pig tissue come from their pericardium. So this is the lining of their heart sewn into a fashion that mimics what our human valves look like. And this is to limit the amount of reactivity, because pig tissue, for whatever reason, seems to be fairly close to human tissue in terms of being able to not incite a immune response that would reject the valve.
So you're telling me they take the tissue of the pig and make a valve? Is
Correct.
That what
They
you're
take
saying?
the lining of the heart, called the pericardium,
right.
of a pig, and actually using almost like sewing techniques, create a valve shape that mimics what a human heart valve would look like.
Now, do they do this maybe with robotics?
Sure. It's
Yeah.
all automated and everything like that.
I didn't know you were maybe sitting there sewing a valve together.
Right.
here.
I don't think there's a sweatshop sitting out there with some seamstress sewing these things together. I will say that Dr. DeBakey, famously, when he was pioneering aortic aneurysm surgery, he took a Dacron graft and sewed it himself on a sewing machine at his home. So
Really?
that is true.
You know, the wild thing is that you and I were both alive when this was going on. Where I don't know whether you were. I was alive anyways when this actually in South Africa when this happened, and it was a game changer. Although nobody believed it would actually become mainstream.
Right. Like heart transplantation is
Right,
what you're
yeah.
referring to. Yeah, that's a miracle too. And we have a number of people here in Greenwood who have experienced a heart transplant. So that's a neat thing that, an unfortunate thing for somebody, but a miracle for another person.
Wow. So you can actually do heart transplants right here?
No.
Okay.
They only do heart transplants in at MUSC. There's, I think, a transplant program in Charlotte, and of course, there's one in Atlanta.
Oh, okay. All right. But still, you know, to have that miracle of life when you think that all is lost is pretty awesome, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there are also mechanical hearts. There's advances in what's called left ventricular assist device technology, where if a heart transplant isn't available or you're not a candidate for a human heart transplant, that you can be a candidate for what's called a mechanical device or a LVAD, as they call it. And that can extend your life and have meaningful quality of life for several years.
I'm thinking of the Wizard of Oz and the Tin Man.
Yes. You need a heart.
If I only had a heart. Yes, if I only had a heart. Okay. Well, I think what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break here. I'm going to look at some of the messages that have come in this afternoon. If you've got a question you'd like to ask Dr. Kim, please 864-332-9355, or you can comment right here on our Facebook page on WCRS. So we'll be back in just 1 minute. I think I do have an announcement to make for those that are interested to know this. I just got a message that the moratorium passed in County Council this afternoon. So if you've been wondering where that is where it is. It passed this afternoon 4-3 in County Council. So let's take it away, and we will be right back. An American 250 revolutionary moment. As America celebrates its 250th birthday, let's meet 4 South Carolinians who helped change the course of history. They were Thomas Heyward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton, and Edward Rutledge. They were among the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence, pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor for American liberty. But signing the Declaration wasn't simply adding their names to a document. It was an act of treason against the British Crown, a decision that could cost them everything. Yet, they stood with their fellow delegates and boldly declared that the American colonies were, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. The story begins on June 7, 1776, when Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee introduced what became known as the Lee Resolution before the Second Continental Congress. It called for the colonies to break their allegiance to Great Britain and declare themselves independent. South Carolina was well represented. Heyward, Middleton, and Rutledge were already serving in Congress. They were joined by Thomas Lynch Jr., who traveled to Philadelphia after his father, Thomas Lynch Sr., suffered a stroke. Over the next several weeks, Thomas Jefferson drafted what would become the Declaration of Independence. Congress debated every word before approving the final text on July 4, 1776. Nearly a month later, on August 2nd, the delegates gathered in Philadelphia to sign the historic document. The sacrifices of South Carolina signers did not end there. Thomas Lynch Jr. and his wife were lost at sea. During the British siege of Charleston in 1780, Heyward, Middleton, and Rutledge were captured and imprisoned in St. Augustine, Florida. They remained prisoners until they were exchanged in July of 1781. After the war, they returned home to help rebuild both South Carolina and the young nation they had risked everything to create. Rutledge later became governor of South Carolina. Their signatures on the Declaration were more than ink on parchment. They were promises of courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering belief that freedom was worth the cost. And 250 years later, the legacy of South Carolina's four signers continues to remind us that the birth of our nation was shaped by ordinary men who made extraordinary choices. This is WCRS Radio, sharing the voice of 1776, brought to you by WCRS Radio and the Issaquena Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution.
Self-Regional Healthcare is currently hiring for clinical and support staff positions. At Self-Regional, we strive to create the best experience for our patients and our team members. We offer flexible schedules, competitive pay, and generous benefits in an environment that is supportive of your individual needs. Come see what makes Self-Regional a great place to work. View our current job openings at selfregional.org/careers.
Oh, that's right. We are right here on WCRS Radio. We got Penny right here. She's sitting right beside me. She keeps looking at Dr. Kim. I'm not sure what she's saying or what she's sensing. But anyways, we're right here together on the radio. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, you'll see a real cute picture of Penny today. We're dressed matchy-patchy, just FYI. All right, now we are here with Dr. Kim. He, of course, is practices cardiology at Advanced Cardiology Associates. He's in a physician practice of Self-Regional Healthcare. So we've had a couple questions come in, and one of them, the person wanted to know if the heart attack that Lindsey Graham had, was Lindsey's inherited from his dad?
That's a good question. Obviously, we always wonder whether the apple falls far from the tree. From what I understand, Lindsey's father had a heart attack. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And, of course, Lindsey Graham had an aortic dissection. And these are two different things. A heart attack, of course, involves the heart, and an aortic dissection involves the blood vessel that comes out of the heart. So the short answer is they weren't the same thing, but the risk factors for both aortic dissection and coronary artery disease, many of them are the same, especially with respect to high blood pressure and possibly high cholesterol. So both of those are risk factors, and whether or not Senator Graham had those two risk factors controlled or not, we may not know for some time.
Now, what about they said he'd been 12 hours on a train and then 12 hours on something else going to Ukraine. What about the travel aspect?
Right. Of course, travel is a stressful situation, so
stress
is definitely a risk factor in many people's lives. We see a lot of improvement in health after people retire. But with respect to travel, the first thing that came to my mind was whether or not Senator Graham may have had a pulmonary embolism or a blood clot to the lungs, because oftentimes with long travel, what can happen is if you're cooped up in a airplane or on a long car ride, if you're not moving around much, blood tends to stagnate in the veins in your legs. And then once you move around, that blood clot can get liberated from your lungs and travel through the heart to your lungs and cause basically an occlusion in the circulation in your lungs. And sometimes people can get short of breath or pass out because of a pulmonary embolism. And that is I won't say common, but that is a reason for people to have sudden death. But that didn't turn out to be the case here.
Right. Now, what about blood clots and everything? How is that all related with the heart?
So blood clots with heart attacks, what happens is that there is a plaque in the coronary artery, basically a cholesterol-laden plaque that has an ooey gooey cholesterol core covered by a hard shell. And for reasons that we don't know, whether this is stress or high blood pressure or some other inflammatory process, the cap that covers this ooey gooey cholesterol core ruptures or gets lifted up, exposing this core to the bloodstream. And just like if you get cut on your skin, what happens is you develop a scab. Mm-hmm. A similar, but not exactly the same process, but a similar process occurs within the vessel. So an attempt to heal what it sees as an injury to the blood vessel wall ends up attracting platelets, which then form blood clots. And these blood vessels aren't any bigger than a soda straw or even a coffee stirrer straw. So it doesn't take a big blood clot to occlude the vessel and cause cessation of blood downstream. And that's what causes a heart attack, is a blood clot that forms in a blood vessel and causes an occlusion so that oxygenated blood can't get to the heart muscle. And that's when people start having chest pain, shortness of breath, and of course, if not treated in time, it can lead to heart failure or death.
Well, we have covered a lot of topics here today.
Yeah.
It's been great. It's been great. We had another question come in. It says, and we have a question about cholesterol meds after a heart attack with a stent. Husband had a heart attack June 5th, currently on statin drug, blood thinner, blood pressure medicine, baby aspirin, and of course attending cardiac rehab. At what point, a year later or longer, is it determined with lab work showing normal limits, would he be able to come off the statin and the blood pressure medicine if you have a stent? She goes on to say his goal is to come off of medicines, but what is a realistic goal for this, and is it possible with a stent, or will this be his way of life forever?
Right. So after a heart attack, there are a number of guidelines that we recommend that patients follow. And with respect to blood pressure, normal blood pressure, whether or not you've had a heart attack or not, is basically at or under 120/80. There might be a little bit of wiggle room, but the guidelines are pretty firm about making sure that people understand that that number is the higher number, and that blood pressures of like 110/70 are actually supposedly the norm. And so if you can get your blood pressure at or under 120/80 without medications, I think that would be ideal. The chances of that happening if you have high blood pressure before, it's variable. There are a lot of people who adhere to a very strict low-salt diet, exercise, and so forth, and are able to get to that level, but the vast majority of people need some sort of pharmacologic help, need a drug to be able to get to those levels. With respect to cholesterol, the guidelines are pretty strict about recommending that you get your LDL, your bad cholesterol, at or under 55 milligrams per deciliter or less. It used to be that if you had an LDL level of 100 or less, that was enough. And then they moved the goalposts to 70 or 75. And now they've moved the goalposts even further, because there is data that the lower you get your LDL, the lower the risk of having a second heart attack become. And that risk is substantial. In other words, you can actually reduce your risk by more than 50% if you can achieve these goals. So I
Yeah,
think,
but is there any fun to living at that point?
right. Of course, people will say, I'd rather, I'm here for a good time and not a long time. And that's an individual choice.
Right, right.
But as far as actuarial data, as far as what we have collected data-wise, we know that if you can achieve these goals, that you'll have a much longer life, number one, and of course have a lesser chance of experiencing another heart attack. If you can get to those numbers without medicines, more power to you. But the likelihood of being able to get to those numbers is not that great, that most people need help.
So, are there long-term side effects to taking blood pressure medicine?
We don't know. I mean, I think that the benefit outweighs the risk, but there are definitely situations where as people get older, there's a tendency for people to fall. And some of these medicines can drop blood pressures precipitously. In other words, out of the blue, the bottom can kind of fall out, and you can drop your blood pressure suddenly, and then risk getting dizzy or falling. And that, of course, a fall can be just as bad as any other kind of cardiac event.
Absolutely.
If you break a hip and so forth, or hit your head and bleed. So there is a individualized approach to a lot of people depending on what we call frailty. And if you're older and frail, we may have to rethink how aggressive we want to be about managing your blood pressure.
It sounds to me, though, like there's no one size fits all.
That's absolutely correct.
And so a cardiac doctor or any doctor has to be able to flex with what the patient that they're dealing with.
Absolutely. And I think everything has to be done with what they call a shared decision model. In other words, that the patient understands the risks and benefits of each one of the proposed treatments, and both the physician and the patient have agreed upon a treatment plan that suits them both.
So,
but mainly the patient.
Yeah. But and don't you think sometimes? I mean, I have felt this way sometimes. That if you really feel something as a patient, you should speak up to your doctor.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes we as patients, we don't, I'm not saying demand, but ask enough questions. Would you say that's true?
Yes, and I think a lot of it is, of course, sometimes you don't know what questions to ask, and you may not necessarily feel comfortable about expressing your concerns or fears to the doctor. And of course, that I think comes with a level of comfort and knowing that you're being heard, for one, and then of course being able to be open to the feedback that you're going to get.
That's true. Well, the person that called just said thank you for your advice. So there you go. Now, we have got to finish up this, but you're going to have to come back and talk again.
Oh, thank you so much.
Absolutely. If our listeners remember just one thing from today's conversation, what would you want it to be?
I think the important thing is to pay attention to your own health, and do your own research and read as much as you can. I think it's important to look at sources that are reliable. There's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet. To make sure that your sources are trusted, I think to start with things like WebMD and sources like that are for the most part reliable, but to just do a Google search about the ailment that you have may not be sufficient.
Yeah, you got to be real careful. There's lots of stuff, and there's stuff on Facebook every day, things that are going to cure you, right?
Right, and I will say that we as a medical establishment don't always have the correct answers either. Something that I brought up several times before is that I was raised on margarine. As a kid in the 70s, I was told that butter was bad and that we needed to switch everything to margarine. And of course, you can't even find margarine on the store shelves because of the trans fat.
Right.
So things that we once thought were healthy may not end up being as good as we thought. And I think we see the same thing nowadays with this sort of approach to seed oils or beef tallow, and what is the good fat and what's bad fat, what's the difference between olive oil and corn oil and so forth, or canola oil. I think we still have to be a little bit judicious about how we approach these things, because everything is sort of controversial in this day and age.
You're right. Everything is controversial in these days. And it is very confusing, because you think, oh, okay, I'll use olive oil. Then you read, no, you should use this. And it's very confusing. So, Dr. Kim, it has been so nice of you to come out here today and spend some time answering questions and giving us some good advice about when you have heart issues, what to do about it. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, Ann.
Absolutely. And I'll be back in the morning, folks. That's right. Penny and I will be here right here on WCRS. Obviously, one of the topics we'll be talking about tomorrow is that the moratorium passed. So make sure you tune in this tomorrow morning right here on WCRS. That's going to do it for us. We're going to drop the curtain. We're going to cue the music and say, see you in the morning. Take it away. Yeah.